So we've got some really fascinating stuff to go through today.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
All this material on biotechnology and the environment. We're really diving deep today
That's right.
into how we can use, well, I guess nature, really,
hmm
to kind of solve some of these big environmental problems.
Yeah, there's some really cool stuff in here. Like I was looking at this section on landfills.
Oh, yeah, how they actually work.
Yeah, and it turns out they're way more complex than just a big pile of trash.
I mean, I always kind of pictured it like just, you know, dumping stuff in a big hole in the ground.
Right, but it's like a whole decomposition process going on in there, like all those bacteria and fungi.
Oh, right, the microbes.
Exactly. They're breaking down the organic matter, things like food scraps, paper, textiles even.
Really? Even clothes.
Yeah, and they turn it all into simpler compounds like carbon dioxide and water,
Right.
but also the stable organic matter called compost.
Wait, compost? Like the stuff I use in my garden.
Exactly, like
Right.
nature's recycling
Yeah.
system.
So you're telling me that garbage can basically become like gardener's gold.
Well, landfill compost is a little different. It's got lower nitrogen content.
I see.
So it's more of a soil conditioner than a fertilizer.
Hmm.
But still, it's pretty amazing that what we throw away can help plants grow, right?
Yeah, that's a really cool way to think about it. But how long does all this decomposition actually take? I mean, are we talking like weeks, months?
That's why it's way slower than that. It can take decades for things to fully break down in a landfill.
Decades, wow.
Yeah. And it depends on a lot of factors, like what's in the landfill,
Yeah.
oxygen levels, moisture, temperature, all that plays a role.
I guess that makes sense.
But one thing that happens over time is that the oxygen gets used up.
Oh, okay.
And so the decomposition shifts from being aerobic to anaerobic,
Hmm.
without oxygen.
And that's where methane comes in, right?
You got it.
I remember reading about how modern landfills are designed to capture methane.
Right, because it's a potent greenhouse gas.
Yeah, and a fire hazard. I'll believe
Actually,
it.
for sure. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
While methane is a problem in terms of climate change, it's also a valuable fuel source. So capturing that landfill gas is a way to turn a negative into a positive.
So landfills are like giant, slow-cooking composters that can also power our homes. That's pretty wild.
In a way, yeah. It shows how we can view waste as a resource if we understand the science behind it. And speaking of managing waste, your notes also cover wastewater treatment.
Yeah, it's one of those things we don't think about much, but it's so essential. Clean water, I mean,
Absolutely.
what surprised me was all the steps involved in treating wastewater before it can go back into the environment.
Yeah, there's a whole series of processes to remove pollutants and harmful microorganisms.
Like a multi-stage filtration system or something?
Which the first stage is actually pretty straightforward and it's all about physical separation. So things like large debris get screened out
Right.
and heavier solids settle to the bottom.
Oh, so gravity does the initial filtering.
Exactly. And that first step already reduces the amount of organic pollution in the water. We measure that with something called biological oxygen demand, or BOD.
BOD, what's that? Like how much oxygen the water can hold.
Well, it's a measure of how much oxygen the microorganisms need to break down the organic matter in the water.
Oh,
So a high BOD means there's a lot of pollution,
got it.
and a low BOD means the water is cleaner. It's really a key indicator of how effective the treatment process is.
So the lower the BOD, the better, basically.
Exactly. And after that initial physical separation, we move on to secondary treatment,
Okay.
which is where the microbes really get to work. This stage focuses on reducing BOD even further through a process called microbial oxidation.
Microbial oxidation sounds complicated.
Well, it's basically microbes using oxygen to break down pollutants.
Oh, okay.
There are two main methods for this: trickling filters and activated sludge.
Trickling filters, is that what it sounds like? Like filtering the water through rocks or something?
Pretty much. The wastewater is slowly trickled over a bed of stones or plastic pieces, and those are covered in this, well, it's kind of a slimy coating called a biofilm.
Biofilm, isn't that like the stuff that builds up in your shower?
Kind of, but in this case, it's actually very beneficial.
Okay, how so?
This biofilm is full of all kinds of microorganisms, bacteria, protozoa, fungi, even algae, and they all work together to break down the organic matter in the wastewater.
So it's like a whole ecosystem doing the dirty work for us.
Exactly, a miniature ecosystem cleaning our water. And the other method activated sludge, that's where Zuglia comes in.
Oh, yeah, I saw that bacteria mentioned in your notes.
So activated sludge involves these tanks where the wastewater is aerated. And these tanks are seeded with a mix of microbes, including Zuglia.
Right.
And what's cool about Zuglia is that it produces this slime that helps form these clumps called flocks.
Flux.
Yeah, and these flocks are like tiny apartment complexes for the other microorganisms, and they're really effective at removing pollutants.
So it's all about teamwork in the microbial world. I love that. But what happens to all that sludge once it's done cleaning the water? Does it just get thrown away?
Oh, no, not at all. Sludge is actually quite valuable. Some of it is reused to start new batches in the treatment tanks.
Oh, so it's like a self-sustaining system.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
And another portion goes through anaerobic digestion.
That's what we were talking about with landfills.
Exactly. And that produces methane, which can be used to power the treatment plant itself. And the rest of the sludge, after proper treatment, of course,
Right.
it can be used as a soil conditioner.
So nothing goes to waste.
Exactly. It's all about closing the loop. But we're not done with wastewater treatment yet.
Oh, there's more?
There's one more stage called tertiary treatment. It involves some final polishing steps like filtration to get rid of any remaining particles
Okay.
and disinfection to kill any lingering pathogens. They might use chlorine, even UV radiation to ensure the water is safe before it's released.
So it's a pretty intense process to make sure our water is clean.
Yeah, it's a multi-step process, a lot of science behind it. It's amazing how we rely on these tiny organisms to clean our water.
Truly incredible. And speaking of cleaning things up, your notes also mention bioremediation. What is that exactly?
Bioremediation is using living organisms, mainly microbes, to clean up environmental pollutants.
So it's like a microscopic cleanup crew.
Exactly. It's like having an army of tiny helpers tackling pollution.
I like that. So can you give me an example of how bioremediation works in practice?
Sure, imagine an oil spill. Certain bacteria can actually eat oil, breaking it down into less harmful substances.
Seriously, oil-eating bacteria.
Yeah, we call this biodegradation, where microorganisms break down complex pollutants into simpler, less toxic compounds.
So it's like decomposition, but at a molecular level.
Exactly. And are these oil-eating bacteria specially engineered, or are they naturally occurring?
That's a good question.
A lot of the microbes that help with bioremediation are naturally occurring. Saprophytic microbes, bacteria, and fungi, they're the real stars here. They're already good at breaking down organic matter, including a lot of pollutants.
Oh, okay.
But scientists are also exploring the potential of genetically engineering bacteria to target specific pollutants even more effectively.
So we're taking these already amazing microbes and giving them a superpower boost.
That's one way to put it, and this is just one example. Bioremediation can be used for so many things, from contaminated soil to industrial wastewater.
Wow.
It's a much more sustainable approach compared to those traditional methods that rely on harsh chemicals
Right.
or energy-intensive processes.
So like we're working with nature, not against it.
Exactly. And, before we move on to biofuels, I had a quick question about these saprophytes.
Oh, yeah. What about them?
Your notes mention decomposers, too. Are those the same thing?
That's a good point. I was wondering about that myself.
So all saprophytes are decomposers, but not all decomposers are saprophytes.
I-
It can be a little confusing.
Mhm.
Basically, saprophytes are specifically the bacteria and fungi that get their nutrients from dead organic matter.
Right.
Decomposers is a broader category. It includes larger organisms like earthworms and insects that physically break things down.
So saprophytes are like the specialized demolition team.
Exactly. They're the ones doing the molecular breakdown, while those bigger decomposers are like bulldozers.
Got it. So they work together.
They do, to keep our ecosystems functioning.
Amazing. This whole hidden world of microbes is constantly at work, cleaning up our messes, recycling resources.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, let's talk biofuels.
Okay, yeah.
Your notes mention that. I'm really curious how we can turn plants into fuel.
Well, right now, corn is the main source of biofuel, specifically ethanol.
Right.
But there's a lot of research looking at using crop residues, things like stalks, leaves, husks, stuff that's mostly cellulose and hemicellulose.
Oh, so turning agricultural waste into fuel, that sounds pretty sustainable.
Right. It's a great idea. The challenge is that cellulose and hemicellulose are made of different sugars.
All right.
And not all microorganisms can ferment all of them.
Right.
So scientists have been using genetic engineering to create strains of yeast that can ferment xylose, one of the sugars in hemicellulose.
Wait, so the same yeast that makes beer can help make biofuel?
It can, and there's more. Researchers have also engineered E. coli to produce enzymes that can break down cellulose and hemicellulose into fermentable sugars.
Oh, we're really pushing the boundaries with genetic engineering.
We are, and this is important because it offers a more sustainable way to break down those tough plant materials. Currently, we use these thermochemical methods, which involve harsh chemicals and high heat,
Right.
but the biochemical approach, using enzymes, is much gentler on the environment.
So we're learning to mimic nature's processes, but give them a little biotech boost?
Exactly. And scientists are always searching for new and more efficient enzymes, even from those microbes that live in extreme environments like hot springs. The goal is to make biofuel production from crop residues as efficient and cost-effective as possible.
It's incredible how biotechnology is being used to find sustainable solutions, from turning trash into treasure to creating fuel from agricultural waste.
Absolutely.
Seems like the possibilities are endless.
And we're not done yet. We still have biogas to talk about. Another example of turning waste into something valuable.
Okay, let's dive into the world of biogas then.
Okay, biogas. So we're talking anaerobic microbes again, right?
You got it. No oxygen needed.
And they're the key players here, just like in landfills and wastewater treatment.
Exactly. We're basically setting things up for those microbes to thrive. They break down the organic matter and produce methane, but this time it's the main event, not just a byproduct.
So it's intentional. We're creating the methane on purpose.
We are. What kind of waste goes into making biogas?
Well, that's what I was going to ask. What are we talking about here?
Lots of stuff, actually. Manure, food waste, crop residues, even sewage sludge.
And it all goes into a biogas digester. It's a sealed container where the magic happens.
So like a giant microbial stomach.
That's a great way to put it. Breaking down all that organic matter without oxygen.
Okay, so I get the how, but why? What's the point of making biogas on purpose?
Well, biogas is primarily methane, right?
Yeah.
And that's a renewable energy source, so we can use it for cooking, heating, even electricity.
No way.
Yeah, especially in rural areas, biogas is a cheaper and more reliable alternative to things like LPG.
So it's like a sustainable energy solution.
Exactly. And there's a bonus, the stuff left over in the digester, we call it slurry.
Flurry.
It's super nutrient rich, so it makes great fertilizer.
So it's like a 2-for-1.
You got it. Sustainable energy plus fertilizer. But let's break it down a bit more.
Okay, how does all this work, like step by step?
Well, there are 4 main groups of microbes involved, each with its own job. It's a real team effort. First up, you have hydrolytic bacteria.
Okay.
They use enzymes to break down those complex molecules, cellulose, proteins, all that stuff, into simpler compounds.
So they're like the demolition crew.
Perfect analogy. Then we have the acidogenic bacteria. These guys ferment those simpler compounds.
Ferment, so like making beer.
Exactly. And they produce organic acids, alcohol, hydrogen gas, and carbon dioxide.
Okay, so lots of byproducts.
Right. And then come the acetogenic bacteria. They convert those organic acids into acetate, along with, you guessed it, more hydrogen and carbon dioxide.
It's like a relay race with microbes.
It is, passing the baton each step of the way. And finally, the stars of the show. Methanogenic archaea.
These are the methane makers.
Yep. They're the only ones who can use that acetate, hydrogen, and CO2 to produce methane. We also find them in cow stomachs, by the way, and wastewater sludge.
Really? So they're everywhere.
They are hard at work making methane. So all this happens inside that biogas digester, turning waste into a valuable energy source.
Amazing how microbes can do all that. So we've covered biogas, which is pretty high-tech,
Yeah.
but your notes also mentioned composting, which seems much more low-tech.
Well, they're both based on microbial activity. Composting is more like nature's way of recycling. It's an aerobic process, though, so it needs oxygen. And those microbes break down the organic material, stuff like food scraps, yard waste, even some paper products, into compost.
So it's decomposed organic matter, basically.
Exactly. And it's full of nutrients, makes your soil super healthy.
Like gardener's gold again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Plus, it keeps all that stuff out of landfills. So win-win, right?
Totally. But I have to ask, what about the smell?
Ah, the compost smell. Well, that happens when the process becomes anaerobic, when the microbes don't have enough oxygen.
Ah,
A well-maintained compost pile actually shouldn't smell bad at all. It's all about having the right mix of materials. Greens and browns.
like what?
Greens are things like food scraps, grass clippings, stuff that's high in nitrogen. Browns are things like dried leaves, wood chips, shredded paper. They're high in carbon.
So it's like a balanced diet for your compost?
Exactly. The microbes need both to thrive.
Yeah.
And then air circulation is key.
To keep those oxygen-loving microbes happy.
Exactly. Turning the pile, having a bin with ventilation holes, all that helps. What else were you curious about?
Well, what's actually happening inside the compost pile that transforms all that stuff?
Well, it's all about the microbes, right? And as they break things down, they generate heat.
Oh, yeah. I've felt that. It gets pretty warm in there.
It does. That heat helps kill pathogens and weed seeds.
Oh, so it's like a sanitizing process, too.
You could say that. And eventually, things start to slow down. The compost stabilizes. Most of the easy stuff is broken down.
Okay.
And you get that rich, earthy aroma, like good, healthy soil.
And the temperature goes down, too.
Right. The microbial activity calms down, so it's ready to use when it's cooled off and has that nice, earthy smell.
So it's not just about how it looks.
Nope. You got to use your senses. Once
Yeah.
it's stabilized, you can mix it into your garden soil, top dress your lawn, even make your own potting mix.
Right.
Some people use compost to grow mushrooms.
Really? I had no idea.
Yeah.
So from kitchen scraps to growing food, that's pretty cool. But what about actually making a compost pile? Any tips?
Well, like we said, aeration is super important. Got to keep those microbes happy. And smaller pieces break down faster.
I should chop things up.
Yeah, shredding or chopping helps.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff do you usually put in your compost?
Oh, the usual. Fruit and veggie scraps, eggshells, coffee grounds, sometimes yard waste.
Perfect. That's a great mix.
Yeah.
Just remember that balance of greens and browns. And avoid things like meat and dairy.
Right. That makes sense. They can attract pests.
Exactly. And avoid diseased plants or weeds that have gone to seed. You don't want to spread those around.
Good point. So what's the best way to set up a compost pile? Like, physically?
There are a few options. Static piles, aerated piles, rotating bioreactors.
Okay, what are those?
Static piles are the simplest, just a pile on the ground. Aerated piles have pipes running through them for air circulation.
Right.
And rotating bioreactors are these big drums you fill up and rotate.
To mix things up.
Exactly. And those can speed up the composting process quite a bit.
So many options. This has been so informative. I'm learning so much about composting.
Yeah.
It's really quite amazing how something as simple as composting,
Yeah.
it has such a big impact on the environment.
It really is. It all comes back to understanding these natural processes,
Mm-hmm.
working with nature, not against it.
Yeah, this whole deep dive into biotechnology and the environment has really opened my eyes to the possibilities. I mean, these tiny organisms,
They really are incredible, aren't they?
yeah, they're like the unsung heroes of sustainability.
They really are. From breaking down our waste to cleaning up pollution.
Even creating renewable energy.
It's like they're doing all the heavy lifting.
And we've only just scratched the surface of what's possible, right?
Absolutely. And as our understanding of microbes grows and genetic engineering gets even more sophisticated,
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to see some truly amazing applications.
Like what? Can you give me an example?
Well, we were talking about how some microbes can naturally break down oil, right? But imagine being able to engineer microbes that can target very specific pollutants, like cleaning up heavy metals in the soil or pesticides.
So it's like having a microscopic cleanup crew that can tackle any mess.
Exactly. We could remediate polluted sites, even restore entire ecosystems.
That were damaged by pollution, you mean?
Exactly. It's a really exciting prospect. And it's not just about cleaning up what's already there. Biotechnology can help us move towards a more circular economy,
Oh yeah, we talked about that a bit.
where we see waste as a resource.
So instead of just throwing things away, we find ways to reuse them.
Exactly, like with biogas and composting, but imagine taking it even further. What if we could use microbes to turn plastic waste into new materials? Or extract valuable metals from industrial
That
waste?
sounds almost too good to be true.
It's definitely a challenge, but that's what research and innovation are all about. It's about changing the way we think, moving away from that linear take, make, dispose model.
To a more circular one where resources are constantly being reused and regenerated.
Exactly. And, it's not just about science and technology. It's about us making conscious choices.
Yeah, like composting at home.
Exactly. Reducing food waste, choosing eco-friendly products, it all adds up.
It's empowering to realize that we can all make a difference.
We absolutely can. And biotechnology can give us even more tools to make that difference.
Like a partnership, right?
Exactly. We can work together to create a more sustainable future.
Well, this deep dive has certainly been inspiring. We've learned so much about the role of microbes in managing waste, cleaning up pollution, creating renewable energy.
And it all comes down to those tiny organisms.
It's amazing what they can do.
Oh.
So to wrap things up, I guess the takeaway is that even the smallest things can have the biggest impact.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And never underestimate the power of human ingenuity.
Or the power of nature, for that matter.
That's right. When we work together, we can achieve incredible things.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of biotechnology and the environment. We hope you learned something new and are excited about the possibilities that lie ahead.